Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anupama, Professor at Department of Economics, Punjabi University, Patiala. I am going to talk about the module Economic, Political and Social Forces affecting policy approaches in different spatial settings from population, urbanization and poverty. So students, we are going to discuss mainly about the basic objectives of an urban policy and the role of social, political and economic factors in framing and implementing an urban policy. Cities have always exhibited diversity. They have always been more than just densely built sites, centers of economic power, or concentrations of population. They have also been marketplaces and have attracted flows of diverse people who have traditionally exchanged goods and ideas. Today, however, the city's diversity takes a new dimension. A number of developments have contributed to this development. For example, globalization, political, economic and social restructuring and rescaling of governance have contributed a lot. Globalization and increasing interdependency of cities in a network society have led to accelerated circulation of people, commodities, capital, identities and images through global space, as well as to the increasing mobility of ideologies, economic principles, policies and lifestyles. Consequently, transnational links between people and therefore between cities and countries are on the increase. Political restructuring, of which the massive transformation since the beginning of the 1990s of and in the former socialist countries in the most outspoken illustration has led to new patterns of social and spatial inequalities. The processes of economic restructuring, first from an industrial economy to a service economy and further to an increasingly ICT-based society, have significantly altered the meaning of space and place in the lives of individuals. The very fast expansion of advanced business services and the increasing importance of creative industries and welfare services have created a complex society which hugely challenges social, spatial theories and practices. Finally, the social restructuring is exemplified in the change from a class-based modern society to a more fragmented postmodern society. Hence, this module aims to throw light on the basic objectives of a policy, the role of political factors, the social factors and the policy approaches, the role of economic factors, and an integrated approach of equitable policies. In essence, this means that urban society can be divided into an increasing number of different groups that sometimes are linked in common networks but often are merely living side by side without very much, if any, interaction or communication. International migration has largely contributed to this increasing diversity of urban population. The so-called rescaling of the governance is a significant issue in this context. National, regional, and local authorities are being frequently affected by the economy, society, and the polity. Finding out how positive aspects of urban diversity can be stimulated and its negative aspects diminished should be the principal aim of any urban and even national policy, given the central role that cities still play in the nation's economic, social, political, and cultural life and will continue to do so. Therefore, these dimensions are being discussed here. Basic objectives of a policy. The basic objectives of equity-based national and urban policies are related with each other. These objectives are related with the general well-beings of the societies. Any policy aims at minimizing the risks and optimizing the opportunities in urban areas through stronger institutions and participatory approach. These policies specifically aim at affordable land and housing, adequate availability of all the basic amenities of life, human safety against natural, economic, and social hazards, clean environment, maintenance of cultural identity of the area, protection against any type of discrimination, sustainable development, skill development, attractiveness to investment, generation of adequate employment opportunities, etc., framing an integrated policy for simultaneous achievement of all of these objectives is really a daunting task. Moreover, many of these objectives would be conflicting with each other and or are affected by a number of conflicting social, economic, political, and spatial factors. Now we can talk about the political factors. In formulation of any policy, the political factors which would have a significant impact are the power relations, predatory practices, social tensions, and disenfranchisement. The political interventions have an important impact upon the achievement of the predetermined goals of any policy. The political agendas of any area strongly influence the policies related with availability and affordability of land and its tenure types, the availability and spatial distribution of urban services, and also the resilience to different risks and minimizing the effects of crisis. Through equitable rules, solid institutions, value sharing, human rights, and rights to commons may create urban equitable systems with equitable laws, institutions, and rights. The effect of political factors on the objective of urban equity in development can be observed from Figure 1. The figure shows that political and social inclusion policies decide to create an urban equitable system through changing laws, institutions, and protecting the rights of the vulnerable groups, which are based on the principles of value sharing, ensuring human rights and rights to commons. If we include the economic inclusion as well, we may achieve safe and resilient cities. But it needs to address the issue of climate change, pollution control, along with social development aiming at empowerment and participation of one and all in urban areas. In the context of different countries and the political systems, since the laws, rules, and regulations and the implementation machinery are different, the outcomes would also be different. Neoliberal ideals of competition and market-led social policy are argued to be manifest in cities in ways that constitute both changes in the external environment within which government functions and the changing internal structure of the state, as the responsibility for some of its functions are rescaled, licensed out to non-elected agencies, or simply rationalized. Thus, questions of how decisions about contemporary cities' social and economic futures are made, where they are made, which institutions or actors are empowered to make them, and in whose interest are central to the great deal of the policy approaches. Thus, the political factors in different areas have led to different policy approaches. Approaches to urban governance. Considering the impact of political factors upon the policy, the approaches to urban governance can be categorized to four general models: managerial, corporatist, pro-growth, and welfare governance. Each of these models displays its own type of governance with regard to participants, objectives, instruments, and outcomes. An overview of these models has been given in Table 1. The table clearly shows the policy objectives, the policy style, nature of political change, nature of public-private relationship, local state-citizen relationship, primary contingency, key instruments, pattern of subordination, and key evaluative criteria of each model of governance. The first approach is that of managerial governance. The local governments are seen as managers to resolve the collective needs and interest through service production and delivery. During the past 10 to 15 years, the managerial dimension clearly has come to dominate over the democratic participatory dimension of local government. The main driver of this shift has been the exacerbated fiscal crisis, first of the nation state and later of local government. The overall goal is to create a public choice style market-like exchange between the producers and consumers of urban services, in which consumer choice rather than preferences among elected officials decides what services they will be offered and by whom. Managerial governance emphasizes professional participation over elite political involvement. Thus, key players in managerial governance are the managers of organizations producing and delivering public services. However, because customer satisfaction is a key criteria, consumers are also essential to managerial governance. The corporatist governance. The corporatist model of urban governance is typical of the small, industrial, advanced democracies of Western Europe. These are political systems historically characterized by a strong and large public sector, redistributive policies, comprehensive welfare state service provisions, a high degree of political involvement, proportional representation, and strong voluntary associations. Another defining characteristic of corporatist governance is that it occurs primarily in the distributive sectors of local government. Although the emphasis is on safeguarding and promoting the interest of the organization's members, there is also a strong commitment to participatory democracy in a broader sense. Corporatist governance portrays local government as a political and democratic system for the inclusion of social groups and organized interest in the urban political process. The idea of participatory local democracy manifested in interest representation is central to this model of urban governance. Policy deliberation is seen as bargaining processes between these interests, and local government is seen as an instrument to create consensus and concerted public-private action. The key criterion of assessment is the extent to which local government and urban politics reflects the ideals of participatory local democracy. An indigenous problem in corporatist governance is fiscal discipline. Compromises that are acceptable to all major represented interests are attained by distributive compensatory policies. This reduces fiscal discipline. Balancing the budget becomes almost impossible because there are strong interests advocating selective public spending, but few powerful advocates of raising public revenues to match the spending. Moreover, corporatist governance frequently creates inequalities between members of favored organized interests on one hand and other social groups on the other. Pro-growth governance. Pro-growth governance is the structuring of concerted public-private actions to boost the local economy. Such collaboration rests on shared interest in economic growth between the administrators and the business elite. This is the least participatory of the four governance models. Mass involvement could never be an option simply because such participation would immediately politicize the pro-growth strategy by bringing in competing local government spending options such as neighborhood redevelopment and other distributive measures. Although pro-growth politics has very few opponents, most local actors have a direct or indirect stake in growth, but it also tends to have even fewer active supporters apart from the public and private elites themselves. Such governance often leads to wide economic inequalities. Welfare governance. This type of governance, which is mainly leftist in ideology, aims at optimizing the welfare of the society. Under this type of governance, the urban political leadership puts great reliance on the state to provide compensatory programs to the city. Indeed, this type of resource mobilization often tends to become more important than trying to reinvigorate the private business sector, partly because of the uncertainties involved in such a strategy, and partly because developing networks with the corporate sector is not an attractive option for political reasons. Welfare governance combines mass political involvement with a hostile perspective on private businesses that are believed to be the root and cause of the city's plight. The priority given to close contacts with the state through political and administrative channels tends to detach the city from the local economy. This in turn exacerbates the problems in the declining economy. Moreover, although the state subsidies provide some short-term remedy for the city to address the economic problems, they quickly become addictive to local authorities who see few incentives to try to develop the local tax base as long as the state covers for the social costs incurred by the industrial restructuring. In sum, welfare governance is anti-capitalist, pro-people in its sentiments. The social factors. Social factors such as caste system, gender roles, religious institutions, etc. not only generate inequalities in the regions as well as the neighborhoods, but also influence the policies to regulate the same. However, the policies that aim at social equality recognize that equity comes with different meanings and facets. For some, it is associated with justice and human rights. For others, distribution and social protection. Still for others, strict application of the law and empowerment and inclusion mechanism. For all these different views and understandings, the common denominator is that equity relates to fairness. And in order to be achieved, it requires leveling the playing field politically, socially, and economically in the local and global arenas. Gender specialists would argue for positive discrimination and affirmative action in order to respond to urban inequities. Bringing urban equity into the center of development means that no one should be penalized for where they live, the way they think or believe, or the way they look. It also means that public goods and basic services should be available to everyone, creating conditions in which they are distributed according to needs. Urban equity in development implies that the urban space should not contribute to reproducing unequal relations or reinforcing existing ones. In this relation, it should ensure that redistributive mechanisms and, where possible, special measures are put in place for a fair, more efficient use of resources, skills, and opportunities, and to promote equal outcomes for all. Figure 2 shows that the policies aiming at spatial and social equity try to achieve it through thorough urban planning, which aims at urban growth, as well as through building equitable cities, which are equitable in terms of accessing and sharing public spaces, mobility, as well as in its design. All the inequalities are fixed by keeping in mind the social diversity so that the growth of the urban areas should be inclusive in character. The social factors and policy approaches. Adding the social dimension to the urban policies will require following features to be added to the urban policies. The first one is equality of opportunity and access. Urban areas are typically occupied by diverse groups of people with different needs and interests. Urban projects thus tend to involve a greater number of stakeholders with overlapping and competing interests. To design effective and sustainable urban projects, it is critical to understand the social dynamics of an urban area as well as existing conflicts among different governments, communities, and private actors. The second feature is that of genuine participation. The experience of urban upgrading projects suggests that public participation improves the performance of these projects and increases their impact and sustainability. A participatory approach in urban policies recognizes that citizens are significant stakeholders and thus key to success. The third feature is that of strong institutions. An increasing emphasis on urban areas as economic engines of national growth can be seen in urban-level decentralization and financial reform projects that focus on the management and delivery of infrastructure and services for all segments of the society. The fourth feature is of social risk management. Urban development policies need to take into account the interconnected and multidimensional social issues that affect these policies, going beyond mere consideration of social safeguards. Such policies accordingly need to be designed from inception using a multi-sectoral perspective. The fifth feature is social impact monitoring and evaluation. Transparent accountability mechanisms shared among the local government, local communities, service providers, and policymakers result in better delivery of social services to the urban poor. It is important to understand and encourage mechanisms that enable the poor to effectively monitor service providers and to strengthen the incentives of these providers to engage in poor areas. Thus, in the context of preparing and implementing an urban intervention, social analysis can lead to a more inclusive project design, sounder institutional arrangements, fewer social risks, and ultimately more sustainable project outcomes. The economic factors. Economic factors are the major driving forces behind any policy formulation. Major economic challenges for an equitable city are rising income inequalities, poverty, unemployment, and inadequate skill capabilities. The economic factors determine the livelihood strategies of the urban residents and therefore prove to be a major pulls and pressure for any policy change. For equitable cities, the economic policies focus upon the redistributive policies, enabling income and social policies, progressive fiscal system along with the faster growth of the urban economy. The private sector can play an important role in ensuring equitable development by spatial spread of basic services and investments. In figure 3, we can see the working of the economic policies. The major course of action is to manage the urban capacity by providing common goods with progressive fiscal system. This fiscal system should continuously focus upon sustainable sources of revenue collection through raising the level of investment and speedy and effective implementation of the projects aiming at enhancing the urban capacities. It must aim at protecting the environment and effective implementation of economic policies. The interest of the local companies and the basic service providers should be duly watched, and the urban governance must increasingly strengthen the local fiscal system. Major economic factors that may influence the policy approaches are: number 1, global restructuring. Global restructuring has shifted the manufacturing units to the developing economies and the developed world becoming the major hub of specialized services. With globalization, these processes have rather been increasing at a greater rate than ever before. Such structural shifts necessarily require changes in the urban infrastructure and the institutions governing the urban systems. The physical results of this process are an increase in commercial, office, and service-related floor space and inland use for transport and other infrastructural facilities. This constitutes a reduction in the land use diversity of these areas and thus affecting the environment of the urban areas. The cities in most of the developing countries have grown so rapidly during this process that the national and local governments have been unable to provide sufficient housing, infrastructure, and social facilities to accommodate the new population. Under such pressures, also the urban policies are being changed for creating more of the affordable housing and other facilities. The second factor is urban poverty. Rapid urbanization, which is the direct outcome of the process of globalization, has also led to urbanization of poverty. The demographic changes in the urban areas and the new entrants into the labor market have also combined to create massive unemployment and underemployment in cities in the developing countries. Such challenges mold the urban policies from merely being growth-oriented to interfere as a corrective agent. Under such conditions, the urban policies have to give due emphasis upon the social protection and creating a conducive environment for self-employment opportunities. The third factor is growing inequalities. Absolute poverty is accompanied by growing inequality within the cities. Much of these inequalities can be attributed to the skewed allocation of resources within cities. For example, in urban public investment and in access of the poor to urban infrastructure services. These differences in living conditions, coupled with varying levels of education and professional training, combine to create growing cumulative patterns of inequality in employment, income, and social mobility. In emerging developing economies, where the governments are contracting themselves in the economic sphere, such as inequalities are further aggravated. Therefore, an equitable urban policy has to take care of these challenges. The fourth factor is increasing crime. Economic distress in all parts of the world is accompanied by declining social cohesion, crime, street violence, household violence and abuse, youth unrest, and a breakdown in traditional family and community structures and values. This calls forth an important attention of the policy towards the security issues. Safe streets, workplaces, and public spaces become important aspects of the city plans for livable cities. All of these factors call the need of strong public institutions, implementation machinery, and public participation through civil society organizations, neighborhood communities, and other grassroots level organizations in the policy process. Equitable policies, an integrated approach of political, social, and economic factors. As we have discussed so far, that the political, social, and economic factors greatly influence the policies in different spatial settings. But these effects are not mutually exclusive. An equitable society in any spatial setting needs an integrated effect of all of these factors for desirable outcomes. This integrated approach has been shown in Figure 4. The figure shows that for achieving the goal of equitable development, we need a combination of political, social, environmental, and economic policies that have their own roles in decision making, planning the urban growth, managing the urban capacity, and achieving a protected and equitable urban environment. For this purpose, the society needs a change in urban rules and legislations, orientation of the public policies, orientation of the urban policies, and plans to fix the spatial inequalities, equitable involvement of local companies for provision of basic services, making changes in the local fiscal system, and turning the cities into resilient and safer cities. So students, let us summarize what we have learned from this module. In short, we can state that urban policy is a dynamic complex of various economic, social, and political factors, which individually and in combination of each other have important influence upon the policy approaches in different areas of the world. However, for equitable development, there is a need that all these factors they act together. Only then equitable, resilient, and safer cities can be achieved. It should also be kept in mind that no single model adopted exclusively can lead to an integrated urban policy. We need to find a rational mix of all available strategies in different arenas of urban life. For better life and ever improving the quality of the same, we need equity, we need growth, we need participation in each sphere by every stakeholder, we need all the services well in place, we need a clean environment, we also need fiscal discipline, and we need many things more. We wish to live in a sustainable mode with sustainable governance styles working for one and all. So that's all with today's lecture. I hope you must have enjoyed it. Thank you.